It's my very great pleasure once again to introduce Canadian composer Ian Cusson. It isn't often that we here at the college get to hear from an award-winning composer of orchestral and chamber music, art songs, oratorios, and operas. And since I'm introducing him today, you might guess that he's going to talk to us about his operatic work today. But first, a little bit of background. Ian was the inaugural Carrefour composer in residence with the National Arts Centre Orchestra for 2017 to 19, and then he became the composer in residence for the Canadian Opera Company for the next 3 years after that. Some of you may remember that in 2017, when the COC produced the opera Louis Riel, it came to light that when the work was composed, and that was in 1967, the composer, Harry Summers, had incorporated, without permission, a sacred lament of the Niska First Nation. Ian was then commissioned by the COC and the NAC to compose a new piece to replace this. It was an act of reparation and healing. You see, Ian's mother's family is from the Georgian Bay Métis community, and his father is French-Canadian. And in his own words, and I quote, "One of my greatest joys is creating work that celebrates and tells us stories that are particular to me and my people. In so doing, I'm participating in the long tradition and rich practice of art making that is so firmly rooted in my community." End of quote. Now, the last few years have been, to say the least, busy and productive ones for Ian. Among his many works that have been produced are a premiere with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra called Ikiru, an opera for young people commissioned by the COC called Phantasma, and a collaboration with Tapestry Opera and Obsidian Theatre called Of the Sea. At the moment, he's in the process of composing, wait for this, not one, not two, but 3 new operas. This is one busy man. Now, one of these works in progress is called Namwayut, a co-composition for Calgary Opera. Another is called Indians on Vacation, an adaptation of Tom King's novel of that name for Edmonton Opera and Against the Grain Theatre. And the third is a co-commission by the National Arts Centre and the Canadian Opera Company based on Cherie Dimaline, Dimaline, I'll get this right yet. Her novel called Empire of Wild for the main stage season in 2025. And from his title, I'm guessing it's about these that Ian's going to be speaking us today. So please welcome, excuse my voice is going today, Ian Cusson to talk to us about indigeneity in contemporary opera, wolfmen, and vacations in Prague.
Thank you so much for having me. Just a quick question for those online. If you can you see me or thumbs up? Great, I'm getting some nods. This is good. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I want to say a couple of words just about where I come from. I was born in a town called Midland, Ontario on the Georgian Bay. So about 2-hour car ride north of Toronto. It's a beautiful plot of land that protrudes into Georgian Bay, and it's really a trifecta of communities. And the names of the communities are actually tell you a lot about the people that are there. So Midland is where I was born. Penetanguishene is immediately beside, which is the name of the town means the land of the white rolling sands, the beautiful sand, white sand beaches. And then the next community, a farming community beside, is called La Fontaine. So you see this kind of mix of indigeneity, settler French folks, and then this hybrid community, which is the community that I'm from, of indigenous people and French people that made this beautiful mélange that is the Métis people. A couple words about Métis. It's interesting to live in this time because there's a lot of confusion. I was just in Quebec, and of course the word Métis means mixed in French. And mixed is a little bit helpful to talk about our people, but it's not quite enough. We were a people that emerged, our ethnogenesis really comes back to the 19th century, the fur trade that went along the waterways from Quebec through Ontario to further west. And these often men voyageurs were sent off to make relationships with First Nations communities to trade wares and goods. And these relationships often would yield what we would call country weddings or country marriages. These were sort of unsanctioned by the church weddings between Indigenous women and French or other European descended men. And the interesting thing is that these mixes would then often yield groups of people that would coalesce and gather into their own communities, which had an understanding of their own identity as being neither First Nation nor European, but something of a completely new culture that had new language, new cultural practice, and these communities stayed together, often very much protecting and being sort of closed to outsiders. Um, my family's community was came via Sault Ste. Marie and then to Drummond Island in the early 19th century. There was a pocket of what we would call half breeds. That was the pejorative term that we've kind of reclaimed in our community. This land was ceded to the Americans. It's now part of, I guess, part of Michigan now. And when it was no longer part of Canada, we were kicked off those, or I mean, proto-Canada, I guess you could say. We were kicked off of that area and brought to Penetanguishene, where we settled in kind of terrible, muddy lands that were not the best places to live. It's important to share this because the history of our people is something that is often misunderstood. It's often maligned, and it really is something that has really spurred me on in my own creative work. Folks like Cherie Dimeline, who Linda mentioned, who is a collaborator on an upcoming opera with me, she's built her artistic career and her novel writing to center stories of our specific community and to, through her fiction, create and sort of share these wonderful teachings that we have in our community that are unique to us particularly. So that's a little bit about me. Why I labeled the talk Wolfmen and Vacations to Prague, and a little bit about how I got into opera writing. As a young person, my parents put me in music lessons, and I studied piano. I had some really excellent teachers who encouraged me to think more broadly about music than, say, just through the study of Mozart and Bach and Beethoven, although those were very, very central to my upbringing, my musical education, but who would send me home with LPs. This was the late 80s. So recordings of Bulgarian women's choirs. So Le Mystère des Voix Bulgares was this really incredible album in the late 80s that I would listen to. And it was a different way of singing. It was a different way of understanding sort of dissonance or tension points and resolution, that sort of thing. I was also sent home with recordings of Harry Summers and other Canadian composers who were writing in really interesting and innovative ways. And one of the sort of central figures in my life as a young person was a voice teacher of mine. And she would talk at length about opera. And I would have a voice lesson, say at 7 p.m., and I would come always early. And the lesson before me was a music history lesson. And she would often be describing in Aida by Giuseppe Verdi. Imagine you would be in this kind of catacomb or in this sort of burial chamber, and it would have been decorated in this way. And she sort of spoke with deep love and brought stories to life. And then she would play recordings from this incredible work. From that moment, I was hooked. I thought, this is the most incredible art form. As a precocious 12-year-old, I sort of dove deep. Early works that were really important for me and composers for me in the sort of operatic world, Benjamin Britten, the British composer, in particular his work, Peter Grimes, very, very important to me. It was the John Vickers recording, the Canadian John Vickers tenor, was one that I had on repeat on a CD player. And there was something about the telling of the story and the story itself, this kind of fishing village and a gentleman who is an outsider to the community, and this incredible use of the chorus on the stage that became its own character, a kind of shadow in the work, completely captured my imagination. At this time, I also had a fascination, and maybe it's sort of the 12-year-old, 13-year-old where you're slightly rebellious, a fascination with the second Viennese school. So Schönberg, Webern, and Berg. If those names don't mean anything, no worries. Berg in particular wrote two operas. The second was left incomplete slightly. The last act is not fully orchestrated, but Wozzeck and Lulu. Lulu, well, I mean, both being quite, they're expressionistic works from the early-ish 20th century, and they're wild works, sonically, story-wise, and they completely captivated my imagination. So both of these, the Britain and the Berg, really were the bedrocks of why I love this art form. A few years ago, my mother passed away last year, and I was going through some boxes of things to move out of her basement from my childhood. And one of the boxes was a box of scores that I had written in my teens. And I found and I remembered I had these incredible, ambitious starts of operatic projects. These would get about a minute of music in. Often I was immediately writing in a full orchestral score, which I don't do to this day. I start with more concise piano vocal score, and then I expand out to an orchestral score. But I would start in this very ambitious way and then completely abandon the project. But there was an Oedipus Rex, there were various stories of my own creation, but there was a bug and a desire to tell story through music. Two last thing before I talk specifically about some projects and give you a couple of examples of these works that I'm working on and have worked on. There are two really significant people in my life in terms of my family members, and these both go through two threads of my family, both my French side and my French Métis side. On my French side was my grandmother, my father's mother. She was an incredible storyteller. She absolutely loved Shirley Temple, and she believed she was sort of the sister of Shirley Temple. And she's left some writings of how she basically is reimagining her own life and understanding her own life as a sort of sister to Shirley Temple. But she would tell me stories. My childhood was filled with stories of her own creation, stories to pacify us, to calm us, stories to excite us when I was coming home sick from school, stories to stimulate our mind. And then on my mother's side, my grandfather would tell me stories of the land. He would tell me stories about how the weather was on April 16th of 1946. He had an incredible memory. He passed away at the age of 100 in 2016, but he had this wonderful memory for the land, the earth, how to work the earth. He had a maple sugar farm, so we would take the horse carriage through the woods to empty buckets of sugar water. A different form of storytelling, maybe a non-Western form of storytelling, but also one that was equally significant in my life. So Wolfmen and Vacations to Prague. I've had some wonderful opportunities to collaborate with great Canadian writers and thinkers. And one very exciting project that is completed and yet is still waiting its premiere in early 2016 or 2026 is a piece called Indians on Vacation, Linda mentioned, an adaptation of Thomas King's novel. And this piece, I'm always on the search. I'm very hungry for potential operatic work. For me, it's about having work work that is being produced, work that is being created, and then work that is being, pondered and considered, and I'm exploring the possibility of acquiring rights to be able to adapt it. The novel is funny. I read this in 2020, and what was important to me was thinking, first of all, in contemporary opera, we have few comedies. There's some great historic comedies. There are contemporary comedies being written, but we don't get this too often. What stood out to me about this novel and what was so powerful was a few things. One, that we saw a middle-aged Indigenous couple, a couple whose children had moved out of home, and they were considering, I guess if you could call it the last act of their life, what does it mean now that we've raised these children and they're gone? What does it mean that we're sort of at the end of our careers? Who are we? Do we have the same connection that we had before we poured into the life of our children? And to me, this was a story that I didn't read often enough. That the fact that this is an Indigenous couple that are questioning these things. Also, they're not sitting in Canada. They're not on a reserve. They're not anywhere near where they come from, but they're in this sort of displaced place, having a very middle class vacation in Prague. And the entirety of the novel and the opera takes place in Prague. And I think that there's something very powerful about that setting because it is the relief to what they know. So they can then hold their own experience up against this sort of mirror or this bouncing back of an old European city. And it's funny. They do talk about pieces of trauma, of historic difficulty, an uncle who went to residential school, an uncle who uh, was sort of devious in the sense that he painted the Indian agent's house with cow manure, sort of as an act of retaliation for his actions, and was given the option: you can go to the state penitentiary, or you can go and be in a traveling circus through Europe. And so in his choice, of course, go to Europe. And so there's this story, this internal story in the piece of the uncle that was in Europe that we never really knew what happened to him. But there is a family story that he brought a crow bundle, a medicine bundle that could hold various objects of family history, of culture, and he left it somewhere in Europe. So on this trip, there is this quest, a gentle quest to find this bundle and to see if they can recover that family history. And this question of history making and culture making and storytelling central. So at one point they begin a new crow bundle with new pieces and new objects that can be held inside of it. What I'll do is I will play a little example, a little section of this, just to let you know where this piece is at in terms of development and how that development works. Generally for opera, a project would be something like 3 to 5 years, although it could be longer, it could be briefer of development. What that looks like is, of course, reaching out to and having conversations with Thomas King about the possibility of making an adaptation, having companies come on board to say, yes, we want to produce this work. And then the act of writing a libretto. The librettist on this project is Royce Favrick, wonderful librettist, and a good friend of mine. And I brought the project to him and said, I think you'd be perfect for this. And sort of a master of adaptation of film and fiction to the operatic form. And Royce loved it and culled the ideas of Thomas King into something that could exist in a 90-minute, 95-minute one-act operatic work. The work of that is, several months, maybe a year of writing a libretto and revising and getting it into a place where then it's handed to me and I begin composing. The journey of composing for me is about 6 months of writing music. This is the technical part of my talk, and for those who care, but yielding this, which is a piano vocal score. So this is about, I don't know, 300 pages of music. And this would be for a pianist to play and all of the singers to sing. It's sort of the reduced version of what the final product will be. And it's very helpful in my creative process to have a piano vocal score because it allows us in a relatively simple way to workshop the piece. We have a group of singers that come into a room. We have a pianist, a conductor, and then the creative team. And we hear it from beginning to end. We can hear what is working, what isn't working, things that may be unclear, because of course, is it comprehensible? The operatic form, words become less discernible. Is the pacing working? It gives us a chance to make edits to all of that, which we did earlier this year at the University of Toronto in the opera faculty. And then from this point, I spend another several months creating this, which is like a 500-page score, which has all of the orchestral music. So I take that piano part, or what is functionally a piano part, and explode it into all of the colors of the orchestra. In this case, this opera has 15 players in the pit, so it's considered a chamber opera, or an opera that could live in a smaller house, a smaller space. It has more of an intimacy to it, although quite a bit of sound is possible with 15 players. And we had the wonderful opportunity to take this piece to Banff, the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity this summer, and in their opera program, hear a workshop of the orchestral the orchestral piece, which is really important to me because it's another opportunity to clarify the storytelling, to make sure there are no bits that are boring, essentially. We're going to hear a little clip of that. And just to set it up, to give you context, the two principal characters are named Bird, or Blackbird Mavrias. He's half Greek and half Cherokee, like Thomas King, and his wife Mimi Bullshield, who comes from Lethbridge, Alberta, and so they live in Guelph, Ontario, also where Thomas King lives, and he is let's say haunted by a set of demons. Now they're called demons by his wife Mimi. And she has taken the opportunity to name his demons. And there are 5 of them. One is Cat, or Kitty, and she is known for catastrophizing. So it's the voice of the world is going to end, this is going to be terrible, and she's frantic all the time. There are a set of twins, Dee Dee and Desi. They're depression and despair, and they're always together, holding hands, doing their thing. We have a Chip for the chip on his shoulder. We have Eugene, which is sort of self-loathing. Dee Dee, Desi, Chip, Cat, Eugene. I got them all. I did get them all. Okay. And what we decided to do, because they're in the novel and they appear as these kind of additional characters, and no one can see them except for Bird, and maybe he doesn't even see them himself. And we decided to use a chorus of 5 people to be these living demons. They also become other characters, secondary characters in the show. And in this moment, we are going to hear a little bit of the demons speaking to him about how Mimi is always right with what she tells you, and you're always wrong, Bird. So we'll hear a little tiny chorus of the demons, and then they'll kind of sit down, and we'll hear Bird sing one of his arias, or one of these solo moments of his contemplation of life and death, and what death might be like in Prague. The the surtitles are on the screen. You may not fully be able to see them. I can help clarify any text afterward. Now I'll pause for about 20 seconds as I try to make sure that everyone can see this. So I will click share my screen. Oh. Sound. I believe I've done it. I've shared with sound. Okay, so here's about a 5-minute excerpt of Indians on Vacation. Enjoy.
Mimi is always right. He is always right. He is always right. When treats you, Bird, roar. Mimi is always right. He is always right. He is always right. He is always right. Always right. When a man becomes a machine of arrows, his worthlessness grows, his worthlessness grows, a cancer. There it is, Bird, right there. It will chow and squeeze and kill you.
trifling, tries to choke you. Mimi snores have settled into their regular rhythm. The air conditioner makes encouraging noises. And there's a rumor of a breeze through the window. I've never loved a rumor so much. I'm not sure I'd like to die in Prague. I suppose it's as good a city as any. It has an antiquity to it, a dignity, a red-roof dignity. Much better than wasting away in a Toronto hospital. Much better than expiring on a plastic bed. Much better than a monitor counting down your final heartbeats. I want to die in Prague. I want to die in Prague. Dying here would be glamorous. An eccentric fact on my Wikipedia page. Blackbird Mavrias died in Prague. See Death and Legacy. Glamorous. In a small hotel on the river Vltava, overlooking the Charles Bridge, a dignity. Pablo Picasso died in Mougins, Peggy Guggenheim in Venice, Pogoga in French Polynesia. I want to die in Prague. I want to die in Prague. Not tonight, bird. Not tonight.
Thanks. Thank you. It's so very much fun to get to play with humor. And humor, it's interesting. My reflection on humor in theater work and in opera, it's difficult to do. one of the pieces of opera making, I'm fascinated about the differences between forms. So novels, a piece of theater just without music, musical theater, opera, and film, for example, and what each of those things do well. When is a form, for example, film, a very visual form where the camera, the lens itself directs the viewer. Very visual. You almost don't need sound like in the silent films. And you can do very, very small, intimate things. There's this moment I went through an Alfred Hitchcock. This is a side tangent. An Alfred Hitchcock, sort of watching all of his films a year ago, and there are 53 in total. And in Notorious, where there's this sort of espionage thing going on. We have this beautiful shot from the top of a staircase, and we see essentially with no dialogue, this crane shot zooms in through a big party of people in beautiful gowns dancing, zooms in to a woman. I think it's Ingrid Bergman in the film, and she's holding a key in her hand, but right behind her back, and she's sort of fiddling with the key. And what we realize from the context in the film is that she's about to go to the cellar and get these plutonium, something or other, uranium things in these wine bottles. And she's a spy and needs to do this. But we establish from this visual of what is happening, where we are, what the time is, and we move to this very emotional, very tension-filled visual cue of the key. I mention all of this because that's not as possible in opera. We have different means of kind of focusing attention. One of the things I love to play with is the story moving forward, so pushing forward the narrative, and then having these moments of expansion and reflection. So this being, we've come through some scene work just before this, and then we get one man's reflection on life. And we have this sort of pithy, emotional reflection. And it's all done sort of sonically, even without, this is just a production where they're standing at music stands. Eventually it will be staged, costumes and sets and all of that. But you just need to hear it to understand what the intention is. So very much like playing with this form, and getting to write in the humorous vein has been wonderful. The next piece that I would like to talk about very, very briefly is the piece Namoyut that Linda mentioned when she was introducing me. Namoyut is a very interesting collaborative project of Indigenous creatives, Marion Newman, Yvette Nolan, the playwright and theater director, and a group of folks that they assembled, including myself, were given license at Calgary Opera to create something, and the parameters of that creative work were left completely open, which is a very rare thing. And also the methodology of creation was left open. So we decided to come together over a series of weeks, over a series of years, to work on a piece where we would have multiple composers on the project, multiple librettists. There would be a creative room that would co-create a piece, and that we would use and intend to use sort of Indigenous principles around the creation. So a sense of equity across the room, trying as much as possible. Yvette Nolan usually uses the triangular shape of opera companies. There's somebody at the top, and then there's a lot of people underneath, and turning the triangle on its side and expanding its edges until you get a sort of flat, planed circle where every person in the room can offer creative thought and input. And we did this. It was it's a project in development, and it's still not complete. It's a project that's more expensive to create, because you have to have more people, including people that you would traditionally bring in the last step, like a conductor. You would bring them in the last moments of the piece after it's all created, but they're also in the room and they're giving input. So that's Namoyut, a project that I just wanted to touch on briefly, because the methodology of making is really interesting. It's with its challenges, of course. It's easy if it's just me sitting in my office writing. I can make all of the decisions, although I try to be very collaborative in my process, but that is collaborative at every step of the process. And so it's a beautiful act of community building, and it's a beautiful act of negotiating. You have to continually negotiate. How are we making a decision on this? Is there a final say? Is there a consensus basis? And how do we navigate that? The project that is upcoming, I mentioned that I like to have projects that are ready for production, which is this one that we just heard, Indians on Vacation, and then projects that are in development. The Canadian Opera Company and the National Arts Centre co-commissioned a work last year of me based on Cherie Dimeline's Empire of Wild, a novel from 2019. The Thomas King is from 2020, so they're fairly recent novels. Cherie is amazing because she's comes from my community. She's from the Georgian Bay Métis community. She lives down the street from my parents' home. She's also a prolific novelist and has won many awards. For The Marrow Thieves was probably her most successful and widely touted novel. But she's written in a whole range of genres. She's really interested in writing horror right now and is working on a number of projects that are more in that very genre side of things. This was an adult or a book for adults as opposed to her young or middle grade young adult fiction. And the story is centered on the land of Georgian Bay. And we encounter a woman at the beginning of the story who her name is Joan Beausoleil. And she works for the family construction company. So they're roofers and they build cottages and this sort of thing. And she's bemoaning the fact that her husband, Victor, left her 11 months ago. And they had a fight and he walked out the door. But this was nothing of his character to do this. And these two people, this was a solid love of one's life. And why, after this kind of petty argument that they had, would he just vanish? And she's wondering about this, and she one day walks into a Walmart parking lot in this small town, and she sees a tent. There's this white tent in the parking lot set up. And she hears music coming from the tent and she thinks, what the heck is this? So she walks over to the tent, pulls back the flap, and it's a church revival service going on in the Walmart parking lot. And she looks to the front, and standing in the position of the preacher, the pastor, the leader of this group is her husband, Victor. And she says, oh my gosh, he left me to go to a church thing and he had no interest in this at all and ever in his life. And she walks up to him and says, Victor, where have you been? And he says to her, I'm sorry, who are you? And he has no idea who she is. And she sort of faints in this moment. And it's just like, then we follow the story through her discovering through traditional teachings of some elderly women in the community that give her information that her husband has actually been co-opted by this wolf man, this rougarou, which the word rougarou is like the French word loup-garou, which means werewolf. And the rougarou is a kind of a community figure in Métis communities. In our community, my mom would hear stories as a young woman from her parents about the rougarou or the loup-garou, the different pronunciations. And generally, these are cautionary stories. So you don't go walking out on the street at night because the rougarou will get you. These were to protect women, essentially, in the community. And how could one come under the influence of the rougarou? Well, by harming your spouse, by betraying your community. There are various ways that you can come under the spell of the rougarou. So throughout this story, we move through some incredible scenes. There's a lot of action and energy in this piece. And she's, of course, confronted with rescuing her husband. So she's positioned as the hero of the story, and she has to save her husband from the grips of this dog man thing, all while negotiating an industry that is trying to extract resources from this particular land that has kind of co-opted this revival church as their means of getting people to sign over their lands. So it's fascinating. It touches on a lot of contemporary issues. It is a grand opera, and the difference between that and the chamber version is you have 60 plus musicians in the orchestra pit. You're in a big house. It'll be done at the Four Seasons Center. And you have 12 principal characters and 40 chorus members. So it's an enormous affair, big scale. And the story itself kind of can exist in that big form. I have some thoughts. There's probably more intramural thoughts about what operas can exist in either a chamber or a very intimate setting, and which ones can exist in grand opera. And I think it's a very blurry line, and many stories can exist in both ways. It's just the way one goes about conceiving it and creating it. Now, where we are at in this development. So the libretto is written. We've done several rounds of revisions on the libretto. I was very active in working with Cherie Dimaline, the novelist, who is also acting as the librettist. Libretto being the text of the opera, the words of the opera, if you will. And we really fashioned how do you take the novel form and adapt it for the stage, what works, what doesn't. When we go back to the Hitchcock example I gave, the small phone call that is made or the text that is sent in the novel works really well because your eyes are right, can be drawn right to the text. Does not work so well in a 2,000 seat theater. How do we negotiate those things? Which characters can be kind of compressed because the form itself, let's say it's a 2-hour opera, 2.5 hours max, where many of the sort of B plots and sublines can't really exist in the way they can in the novel. And how do you achieve telling backstory of characters to show their richness and complexity without giving a whole chapter of a backstory of the character? So there's all these negotiations that we're making to make it a viable and exciting piece of theater. I will play one little excerpt of music. It's the only music that's been composed for this at this point. And this is an aria that Joan will sing. And in it, there's no text for you to read. So to give you a sense of where she is now beginning the journey of going armed with the knowledge of what has befallen her husband, Victor. She's going to now try to get him back. One of the ways, by the way, there are two ways or multiple ways you can get a person back from the grips of the Rougarou, but the big one is remind him he is a man. And so to remind a person that they are a man, you can seduce them. That's number one. This is going to be her attempt here. She will seduce him. And the second one is to make him bleed. And that's another way to remind a person that they're a man. You have 1 year to get a person back from the grips of the Rougarou, or he will forever be under the grip of this wolf man, and he'll never become a human again. So she is the clock, the ticking clock as well. Here she's singing in the woods, and we don't see this in the concert setting here. She has a beautiful cloak on, and at one point, we'll get a little orchestral interlude in this piece, and she removes her cloak and is this beautiful gown of Métis beadwork. And she's saying, to get you home, I will guide you with this map, and my body is the map. And so I think it's pretty sexy and romantic. Okay. So Joan's aria from Empire of Wild. And this is orchestrated for a chamber orchestra just for the purposes of this presentation. We had done a small orchestration. Enjoy. Sorry, let me just make sure it's coming up on the video feed. I will stop sharing. Oh, you can see it now? Okay. If I were to do this, do you still see it on there? Okay. Or did it go? I may just leave it as the smaller frame if that's okay. I apologize. It's a little smaller, but that way, hopefully you'll see it at home. Okay.
you to the